set themselves an unprecedented technical challenge to engineer a statue of superhuman proportions. The Colossus once guarded the harbor to the island of Rhodes. It stood for nearly a century and was one of the ancient wonders of the world. At 110 feet high, it was nearly as tall as the Statue of Liberty, built over 2,000 years later. The story of the Colossus began in 305 BC, when a powerful enemy fleet began a year-long siege of the small island of Rhodes. The attackers far outnumbered the small island's population, but against all odds, the islanders defeated them. To celebrate their surprising victory, the Rhodians decided to build a giant bronze statue of their sun god, Helios. A local sculptor, Rhodes of Lindos, was given the challenge of building a statue nearly twice as tall as any ever built. Construction took 12 long years of hard labor and 200 tons of bronze. To begin, the architect, Rhodes, had to work out where best to build the statue.
Well, as an engineer, the key considerations the sculptor would need to think about in finding a location for the Colossus would be, firstly, the visibility. It would have to be in a prominent position overlooking the harbour. Secondly, it would need a really strong rock foundation to be built upon.
Early representations of the Colossus show the statue astride the harbour.
Well, the old harbour here at Rhodes is in a natural bay, but still the mouth of the harbour is very large compared to the height of the Colossus. This tower on the right of the harbour mouth is about the height that the Colossus was, and you can see how ridiculous it would be that it could stand astride the harbour mouth with its legs at an impossible angle, very difficult to support.
Recent archaeological finds have now convinced experts that the Colossus stood on the hill overlooking the bay, where a medieval castle now stands. Further evidence of a sanctuary to the sun god Helios near the castle suggests that this was where the Colossus had once stood. There was no precedent for a statue of this size, so at every stage of construction, Rhodes was taking a step further into the unknown. He decided to build a wooden frame over which he would hang beaten bronze panels. Starting at the feet and working upwards, the Colossus was supported by a mound of earth as it grew to over 100 feet high. The island of Rhodes was renowned for its bronze work, which was a major export. But because the Colossus was so large, the entire casting pit could only make one small section at a time.
We have evidence from around the time that the Colossus was built that the Rhodians were experts in bronze work. This is one of the largest bronze casting pits ever found from ancient Greece, and it proves that the Rhodians were able to make large, hollow bronze pieces. It works a bit like a kiln. They would fashion a large block of clay, and then by placing wax around the outside in a thin layer and more clay outside that, they could create the shape that they wanted to cast. They would pack earth down around the whole structure and then fire the clay from beneath using fires in the bottom of the pit. That would then set the clay into the shape of the form. The wax would be drained out and the liquid bronze poured in from the top.
Hundreds of these pieces were cast and carried up the growing mountain to be attached to the wooden framework. Stones were dropped down inside to give stability. But after 12 years of construction, when the earth was removed, how could Rhodes be sure that the Colossus would stand up?
To support a human shape with two legs, a sculptor might use a third support disguised in some way, something draped down to the ground through which they can have a third leg, essentially, for the structure to stand.
Whatever technique he used, Rhodes' masterpiece withstood the elements for nearly 60 years. But in 224 BC, there occurred one natural force the Colossus could not survive.
An earthquake doesn't just shake it backwards and forwards, but it would also twist it. And twisting the top of the tripod would break the connections between the legs, and at that point, given that the ankles are secured in the ground, it's the knees that are going to be the weak point, and that's where it would buckle.
The people of Rhodes consulted an oracle, which warned that to rebuild the Colossus would bring them misfortune. So the giant statue lay in pieces for over 1,000 years, until finally the bronze was sold for scrap.
Good morning, everyone. Today we will be talking about something huge, something famous. It's the Colossus of Rhodes. My members, me, myself, Augustine, Daniel, June, and Pui will be presenting about this said topic. We'll be first talking about the history, and then we'll move on to the materials and structure and the layout of the monument itself. Moving on, we will first present our first speaker, Daniel.
Hello, my name is Daniel, and I will be the first of 3 speakers to talk about the history of Greece. Greece and its surrounding Greek islands are a country with a particularly rich history and home to many great Roman conquerors. Greeks call themselves Hellenes, and the country of Greece itself is actually called Hellas by the Greeks. History of Greece left behind a host of ideas, concepts, and the art foundation for the Western civilization. Most Greek civilizations survived through permutations. Ancient Greek dialects are ancient Greek dialects which are influential to the modern days, such as the English language itself. Starting with the Stone Age, earliest evidence of habitation was a skull found in Metralona cave in Halkidiki, dating back 300,000 to 400,000 years ago. Early evidence of burials and commerce in the Aegean have been dated back since 7,250 BCE. Stone tools were found in sites in Epirus, Thessaly, Macedonia, and Peloponnese. This revealed the existence of the Paleolithic, Mesolithic communities in the Greek mainland. Excavation shows that the first settlements from the Paleolithic era dates back from 11,000 to 3,000 BC. The Neolithic settlements of Seslo were dating back 7,000 to 3,200 BC, and Dimini dating back 4,800 to 4,500 BC. Neolithic settlements of Seslo dating back 7,000 to 3,200 BC, and Dimini dating back 4,800 to 4,500 BC. Thessaly exhibit early evidence of sophisticated social organization, fortifications, construction of pottery art, as well as modern-day houses. Mycenae is considered the first Hellenic civilization, with various settlements testified that the territory that defined modern Greece was a hub of cultural activity since the Stone Age. The settlements of Dimini and Sestos show that those Stone Age people of Greece had reached a high level of development by 3000 BC with an advanced economy and complex social structure. Greece gave birth to the great civilization of Minoans, dating back from 2,600 to 1,500 BC. Mycenaeans, 1,500 to 1,150 BC, as well as the Cycladic civilization. Moving on to the Bronze Age, which lasted roughly around 3,000 years, it saw major advances in social status as well as economic and technological advances that made Greece the hub activity of the Mediterranean. At the same time, civilization of the Greek mainland is classified as the Hellenic. The Mycenaean era describes Hellenic civilization towards the end of the 11th century BC, and it is also known as the Age of Heroes, due to its source of mythological heroes and epics like Hercules, the Iliad, and the Odyssey. All 3 civilizations of the Bronze Age had many characteristics in common. However, they were distinct in their culture and disposition. The Minoans are considered to be the first advanced civilization of Europe. Mycenaean culture had a great deal of influence with its legends and Greek language on what later became the splendor of classical Greece. Simply put, the Mycenaeans are basically the first Greece. Either by fortune or force or fame, the Mycenaeans are less than both The Cyclades and the Minoans. By the end of the 10th century BC, Mycenaeans expanded their influence over the Greek mainland. The islands of the Aegean and the Ionian Seas, Crete, and the coast of Asia Minor. However, after 1100 BCE, Mycenaean civilization ceased either through internal strife or outside invasions such as the Dorian invasion or the Persians, or possibly both. It is not known for sure. What is known is that the excessive damage done to the Mycenaean civilization took 300 years to reverse. We call this period the Dark Ages, probably because the people of Greece fell into a period of basic sustenance with no significant evidence of cultural development. Historical records renders our own view of the era rather incomplete.
Hello, my name is June, and I'll be continuing the history of Greece for my friend Daniel. I will be explaining about the Dark Ages of Greece. First, the old major settlements were abandoned with the notable exception of Athens, and the population dropped dramatically in numbers. Within these 300 years, people of Greece lived in small groups that moved constantly in accordance with their new pastoral lifestyle and lifestyle needs. They left no written record behind that can lead to a conclusion where they were illiterate. Later, between 950 and 750 BCE, Greeks relearned how to write once again. But this time, instead of using the linear B script used by the Mycenaeans, they adopted the alphabet used by the Phoenicians, innovating in a fundamental way by introducing vowels as letters. The Greek version of the alphabet is eventually formed into what we know as English today. Life was undoubtedly harsh for the Greeks of the Dark Ages. However, in retrospect, we can identify one major benefit of this period. The deconstruction of the old Mycenaean economic and social structures with the strict class hierarchy and hereditary rule forgotten, and eventually replaced with new social-political institutions that eventually allowed for the rise of democracy in the 5th BCE Athens. Other such notable events from this period include the occurrence of the first Olympics in 776 and the writing of the Homeric epic, Iliad and the Odyssey. From the 8th century BC, colonization had taken Greek speakers all over the Mediterranean, from the Black Sea to Turkey to North Africa, Italy, France, and Spain, like frogs around a pond, which is a famous quote from Plato. Now that sums up the Dark Ages of the Greek. Now I'll move on into the Archaic Ages of the Greek. The Archaic period lasted for about 200 years from 700 to 480 BCE. Greek population recovered and organized politically in city-states comprised of citizens, foreign residents, and slaves. This required the development of an advanced legal structure that can ensure the smooth coexistence of different classes and equality of the citizens, irrespective of their economic status. This was a required precursor for the democratic principles that we can see develop later on, 200 years later, in Athens. Greek city-states of the archaic epoch spread throughout the Mediterranean basin through a very vigorous colonization. As the major city-states grew in size, they spawned a plethora of coastal towns in the Aegean, the Ionian, and a handful of other countries, all the way down to southern France, Spain, and the Black Sea. These states, settlements, and trading posts, numbered in the hundreds, became part of what we know as an extensive commercial network that involves all the advanced civilization of the time. As a consequence, Greece came into contact and aided in the exchange of goods and ideas throughout ancient Africa, Asia, and Europe. Through domination of commerce in the Mediterranean, aggressive expansion abroad, and competition at home, several very strong city-states began emerging as dominant cultural centers. It is most notably in the Athens, Sparta, Corinth, Thebes, Syracuse, Miletus, and Halicarnassus, among all others. By the 5th century BC, classical Greeks had organized themselves into independent citizen states known as polis, or, from what we can derive, call it political. Such notable examples are Athens, Sparta, Ephesus, Byzantine, and Marseilles. Each polis has its own law, dialects, currency, and government. Each of them are strongly independent. They fought among themselves for domination and internally over different styles of constitution, such as tyranny, democracy, and oligarchy.
The flurry of development and expansion of the archaic era was followed by the period of maturity became known as Classical Greece. Between 480 and until 322 BC, Athens and Sparta dominated the Hellenic world with their cultural and military achievements. These two cities rose to power through alliances with the involvement of the other Hellenic states, reforms, and a series of victories against the invading Persian armies. They eventually resolved their rivalry in a long and particularly nasty war that concluded with the demise of Athens first, Sparta second, and the emergence of Macedonia as the dominant power of Greece. In the 4th century BC, Macedon in the north under its king Philip II and his son Alexander the Great took brief control, but on the death of Alexander in 322 BC, the mainland split into a series of leagues under Macedonian governance. Radical, direct democracy died at that moment, never to be restored. Other city-states like Miletus, Thebes, Corinth, and Syracuse, among many others, played a major role in the cultural achievements of classical Greece. Early in the classical era, Athens and Sparta coexisted peacefully through their underlying suspicion of each other until the middle of the 5th CBC. The political and cultural disposition of the two city-states occupied the opposite ends of the spectrum. Sparta, closed society governed by an oligarchic government led by two kings, occupied the harsh southern end of the Peloponnesus, organized its affairs around a powerful military that protected the Spartan citizens from both external invasion and internal revolt of the Helots. Athens, an adventurous open society governed by a democratic government, thrived through commercial activity. Period of Pericles' leadership in Athens is described as the Golden Age. It was during this period that the massive building project that included the Acropolis was undertaken. The landmass of Hellas became part of the Roman Empire in the 2nd century BC, and Greek polis in Turkey and elsewhere followed. The leagues and polis continued to run themselves, but were now under close Roman supervision. Roman expansion east was made easier by the conquest of Alexander the Great, who introduced Greek polis-style culture, administration, and urban living as far as Afghanistan. The Greek language, however, spread throughout the Mediterranean. Greek was heard in Rome probably more often than Latin. The Gospel writers and St. Paul knew perfectly well that they would have to write in Greek if they wanted their message to spread. Romans led up Greek culture, literature, history, philosophy and architecture, and by making Greek a central feature of their education system, ensured that Greek achievement would be handed on to us today. By the 4th century AD, it was clear that the Roman Empire was becoming too large to be centrally controlled. In 324, the Roman Emperor Constantine in fact split the empire into two halves, the eastern half centered on Greek Byzantium, renamed Constantinople, now Istanbul. When the Western Roman Empire collapsed under the impact of Germanic invasions in the 5th century, Constantinople became the new center of the Roman Empire, known as the Byzantine Empire. The collapse of the Western Empire led to some turmoil in the east, but the Byzantines gradually regained control over Greece until the treacherous attack on Constantinople in 1204 by the Frankish Crusaders, Western Europeans. The Franks split up Greece, but fighting among themselves and against Serbs, Albanese and Turks left them fatally weakened. On 29 May 1453, Constantinople fell to the Ottoman branch of the Turkish invaders, who had been mopping up the remaining territories of the old Byzantine Empire. And for nearly 400 years, Greece was under Ottoman control. By the 19th century, the empire was economically on its last leg, and on 25th of March 1821, Greece declared its independence. When France, Britain and Russia threatened to intervene against the Turks capitulated. Greece used various means to extend its territory into the Ionian Islands, Sicily, Macedon, Crete, and the Aegean. A disastrous advance into Turkey failed, and it reached its present configuration in 1947. German occupation of Greece in the Second World War ended in 1944, but a violent and complicated civil war at once broke out between communist and Western-backed government forces, resulting in a Greek government inclined to the West, but with significant anti-Western sentiment still in force. In 1967, a military junta overthrew the government and ended the monarchy. In 1974, the regime imploded, and since 1975, Greece has been a democratic republic. It joined the EU in 1981 and adopted the euro in 2001. Tensions with Turkey remain.
Alright, now let's talk about the Colossus. Long ago, the city of Rhodes was known for its great giant statue, the Colossus. This huge iron and bronze statue stood over the great harbour of Rhodes, a city that was one of the great trading cities of ancient times. Today, Rhodes is known much for its Colossus as for its trade. But the Colossus wasn't always standing watch over the harbour. Here's how it came to be. The Rhodes, an island off coast of Asia Minor, was in an excellent position to be a trading centre. Ships from the Greek lands and the Persian provinces would stop in Rhodes on their way to their destinations. The Phoenicians and others who traded in the Mediterranean area would also stop in Rhodes. In the time of Alexander the Great, Rhodes became part of Alexander's empire. But when Alexander died, the struggle over his kingdom extended to Rhodes as well. The result was a giant siege. Countless invaders fell against Rhodes' high and sturdy walls. However, after what seemed like a fruitless battle, the invaders eventually just gave up and went home. The people of Rhodes were so happy that they didn't have to take orders from anyone that they decided to build a giant statue of their favorite god Helios to celebrate their continued freedom. The architect given the honor to building the Colossus was Charles of Lindos. Charles was chosen because of his popularity at the time. His expertise made him an obvious choice because he had worked on the construction of various large-scale statues. His teacher, Lysippus, was well known for his skill, and today is considered one of the 3 greatest sculptures in the classical Greek era. The statue itself was over 30 meters tall. This is 98.4 feet tall. The construction started around 292 BC to 280 BC. This means it took around 12 years to finish due to insufficient building supplies and the lack of labor work. They progressed only 6 to 8 feet per year. That's 6 inches to 8 inches per month. The statue stood on a 15-meter tall pedestal on the Mandraki harbour entrance. However, other sources indicated that it stood on the breakwater harbour. Besides that, the statue was made mostly of iron and bronze, which were mostly reforged from the various equipments and weapons left behind by the Demetrius army. One of the most notable ones being the abandoned second siege tower as scaffolding for the lower levels of construction. The upper portions of the statue were built with earthen ramps piled on the sides of the Colossus. After completion, all the river dirt were removed to unveil the finished Colossus. It took a span of 12 years, as mentioned earlier, including the base pedestal, which was around 80 meters in diameter. It was either circular or octagonal. Not many people are sure. The feet of the Colossus, however, was carved in stone and lined with thin bronze plates and grossed together. 8 forged iron bars set in a radiating horizontal position formed ankles and were turned up to follow the contours of the leg, following become progressively smaller and smaller. The insides of the statue, however, were filled with stone columns. Stone blocks were used as weights and were hung on horizontal bars. Approximately 6.8 tons of iron bars were used as frame support. Many ancient Greek monuments were composed almost entirely of marble or bronze. However, cast bronze was becoming more popular medium for major works by the early 5th century. Many sculptures, known only in marble for the Roman market, were originally made in bronze. Back to the topic. Individual curved plates cast from bronze measured up to 60 inches square with turned-in edges and were joined together by rivets through holes formed during casting. This formed a series of rings, and the lower parts of the structure needed more support, as it was the holding point and the weakest point of the structure. Lower parts to the knee were about 1 inch thick, knees to the abdomen 3/4 thick, and the rest of the upper body was 1/4 to 1/2 inch thick, except for places which required additional strength, such as the shoulders or the neck. The inside of the statue would need to be filled with stone until the knee at the very least for stability. Now, the exact method of construction is quite unknown as ancient descriptions vary. However, most accounts suggest that the basic construction method was bronze over iron frame and the pedestals were made of marble. According to ancient accounts, which differ to some degree, they describe the structure as being built with iron-tight bars to which brass plates were fixed to form the skin. Now, the statue stood proudly at the entrance to Rhodes Harbour for 56 long years until an earthquake broke it into pieces. For hundreds of years after that, the pieces lay where they fell, a symbol of the city's former glory. Sometime around 600 AD, the Arabs conquered Rhodes and broke up the statue's pieces. Stories at the time say it took around 900 camels to cut away all the stone, iron, and bronze that once made up the massive Colossus of Rhodes. This is Daniel's saying.